So we've talked a little bit about Subway on prior videos, but there's another sandwich chain that I think's equally interesting to talk about, albeit for different reasons. Quiznos. Quiznos, it's a weird name. Is there a reason behind that name, or does anyone know how they picked that? The story is that the original owners were told that names with Q or Z in them were more memorable to consumers, and so to reduce the odds, or improve the odds, I guess you should say, they picked a name with Q and Z. How did that really work out for them? We're gonna talk about the brand as a whole, how it got started, the rise, the fall, and our views as to why the company has struggled so much, not just in the middle of its life, but as of late as well. My name is Nick McLean with 4 Pillars Investors, and I would be the last one to say that I'm the foremost authority on really any subject. However, I can say that 4 Pillars and myself personally have looked at a large number of QSR opportunities over the years. Not only different brands, but different concepts, different operators, different franchisors, different owners, et cetera, et cetera. Quiznos was founded in 1981 by Jimmy Lambados and Todd Disner. These two guys had really a chef focused, a high quality food focus that they wanted to bring to the QSR space. In fact, Jimmy and Todd actually cooked for well-known folks like Elvis and the Rolling Stones. Their success in the industry is clear, really impressive. I mean, how many people have cooked for Elvis? They only owned the chain though for about 6 years, selling it to a father and son team by the name of Rick and Richard Shaden. Those two drove it through the years of high growth and also were there during the years of decline. What exactly does that mean? You might not know this, maybe you do. I mean, they got to the point where they had almost 5,000 units worldwide. And if you look at a brand like Subway today, they have approximately 44,000 units worldwide, pales in comparison. If you look at some of the other sandwich competitors today, I mean, they're right there. The second largest one is probably Jimmy John's. They have, I think, 2,800, maybe closer to 3,000. Potbelly has around 500. Firehouse Subs has, just over 1,000. So when you look at Quiznos having around 5,000, I mean, that's pretty good scale. But where is Quiznos today? They have around 300 to 400 units. I mean, clearly something had to have happened for them to become the second largest sandwich chain, and now to the point of, relative obscurity, where I don't even know where the closest Quiznos is to me. How exactly did that happen? Quiznos as a franchise, grew very rapidly up until the Great Recession. Then, unsurprisingly, during the Great Recession began a period of decline. What's interesting though is even after the Great Recession, the brand continued that decline. What was going on within the brand at that time? Well, one key component was that franchisees were really struggling. There was the fact that the food costs were very high. What I think is more important though is that from a consumer standpoint, there really wasn't a level of differentiation that was sufficient to justify the higher cost. I don't know what your impressions of Quiznos are, but I think they had higher quality meats. I think that their sandwich size was a little bit smaller than Subway's. I definitely remember it being toasted, and I remember it having, some sauces. One of their taglines, I believe, was, toasty.
Try our new peppercorn Parmesan turkey with bacon sub for $3.49, only at Quiznos. Toasty.
That toastiness is, definitely part of their brand. Their view was that heat or warmth brings out the flavors in pretty much every food. An example of, these higher costs and the challenge to be profitable is a promotion that the CEO ran regarding Quiznos prime rib cheesesteak. The CEO said, offered 100% money back guarantees, double the meat, and it was higher quality than Subway. And first off, I think it definitely can be a questionable tactic to compete against a competitor and mention their name, because you're giving them free press. But even so, look at what he was saying. Okay, we're gonna give you twice the amount of meat.
Not doing that again. I burned.
And it's higher quality. Quality is subjective, but double the meat is more quantifiable. But, it begs the question, okay, if doubling the meat is so important, you can do that at Subway. I don't remember the exact pricing at that point in time, but given that Subway has always been a value play, I think Subway would still have been priced very similarly to Quiznos, or maybe even a little bit more with double meat. And so that example is very important because in my eyes, it's somewhat questionable as to why that whole program was run in the first place. I think another good example of why franchisees struggled are the startup costs. The startup costs today, if you go to the Quiznos website, it's estimated to be around $500,000 on the low side to almost 1.5 million on the high side. I'm also not sure exactly what the average revenues would be for a Quiznos, but if you say a Subway's average revenues are about 500,000, which is accurate, let's just be generous and say that an average revenues for a Quiznos are $1 million.
Toasty.
And again, let's be generous and say net income margins are 15%. I mean, that might not even account for the owner's salary. And if you're making $150,000, you're gonna have a very long payback if you invest 1.5 million. There's compounding factors, with the differentiation, the higher food costs, the higher startup costs, all of these added together to create a situation in which the franchisees, it was very hard for them to make any money. And that was a big reason for the decline. So when you look at the chains like Jimmy John's and Firehouse, and Potbelly's a little bit smaller, but all of these other brands are still a pretty decent size. I mean, what happened to Quiznos? My personal opinion, it really came down to 4 different issues. The first one, I think, is just questionable management at the franchisor level in general. From the perception of the franchisees that the franchisor was charging too much for the food, that is certainly questionable, to some of the marketing objectives and marketing programs that they ran. They actually expanded into gyms, places where you work out, because the CEO said that their core competency was franchising.
Not doing that again. I burned.
All of these things, maybe they would have been successful in a different time period, with different consumer preferences or whatever, but ignoring whether or not the franchisor was making too much money on the food cost, generally speaking, was a huge issue for the ultimate success of the brand. The food costs were too high, and because of that, the franchisees struggled. If food costs are going to be higher, then subsequently you probably need to charge more for your products or your food. But that kind of exacerbates the issue that consumers didn't feel like there was enough differentiation or enough increase in quality to justify that higher cost, which leads us to the next point: innovation. I mean, sometimes whenever there is a new innovative product, the price sensitivity of the consumer won't be as great because it's exciting. I want to try that. That looks really good. Really wasn't that innovation there at Quiznos, unfortunately for the brand. Again, mentioning Subway, they introduced the Eat Fresh campaign.
Subway, eat fresh.
I mean, that was very successful for the brand whenever people were really excited about eating fresher foods, because that not only had good health connotations, also it was just, I think it made people feel good. They thought it tasted better because it felt fresh. I mean, what was the innovation going on at Quiznos? There wasn't any. I think they just doubled down on toasted subs and purportedly higher quality ingredients, as well as the sauces and some innovative flavors. That brings us to our last point, the most important. If you look at the fact that they toasted their subs as well as the sauces and other flavors, the unfortunate part for the brand is that those are very easy to replicate. All you need is a toasting oven and introduce some sauces. I mean, you don't even have to create your own sauce. You could partner with a popular sauce. I guess a real popular one right now would be sriracha. That's relatively easy to do, or if you can create an alternative. Those are 2 easy to replicate aspects of your strategy, and you know what? Subway did just that.
Runs, tender chicken, zesty marinara sauce, melted cheese on toasted freshly baked bread. Subway, eat fresh.
I don't know this for a fact, but what I've heard is that whenever Subway introduced their toasting ovens, they actually called it the Quiznos killer, because they thought that simply introducing a toasted component to their subs would essentially kill off the competition from Subway. If that really was true, I really can't argue with it. I mean, if you look at the numbers of how quickly the brand has declined, you could make a strong argument that the toasting component at Subway really was a Quiznos killer. Another questionable decision by management was who they chose to be the mascot for the brand. I mean, if you look at Subway, they had Jared Fogle, which, again, turned out to be a disaster.
Not doing that again.
I think it's hard to foresee what happened there, but let's just look before all the awful stories came out. He lost a whole bunch of weight eating Subway sandwiches. I mean, that's a pretty good story. And of course, I think a brand would want to capitalize on that. What did Quiznos do? Well, they introduced as their mascot things called sponge monkeys. Now, do you remember what the sponge monkeys are? They're kind of potato shaped, look like rodents with human teeth, and one of them I think plays a guitar, and they sing about how much they love Quiznos sandwiches.
We love these subs, 'cause they are toasty subs. The Quiznos subs, they are so good we need them robot eating roast sausage barbaric.
I will say that there's probably a certain component of the population that just thought this was, hilarious and loved the sponge monkeys, but at the very least, it's a debatable strategy as to whether or not that was a effective decision to have the sponge monkeys be the mascot for the brand. So given that the investment required to open a Quiznos is higher, what do some of the other components look like, and how do they compare? Certainly the upfront investment I think for Subway is less, but what's interesting is that the royalty percentage charge as well as the percentage for the ad fund is lower for Quiznos on both counts. It's a 5% royalty and 2% to the ad fund. At Subway, it's 8% for royalty and 4.5% for the ad fund. That's interesting. Lower upfront for Subway, but higher recurring charges where it's flipped for Quiznos. What's important to the franchisee? I mean, I think to some degree that the franchisees should probably support a little bit higher marketing if it's coming out of their revenue, which is going to be variable based on how successful they are. That's a big reason for the resurgence in Subway's brand, because they have this massive $500 million plus ad budget annually that they can use to hire people like, one of my favorites, Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady. Some of those things are counterintuitive because, for me, what I would like to see is lower upfront and more going to advertising as opposed to the Quiznos model. Me personally, I'm not in love with the franchise model that Quiznos has in place currently. So if those are all the reasons for why Quiznos has struggled, I mean, where is the brand today? Well, they're actually trying to bank on nostalgia a little bit. What I mean by that is after a roughly 20-year absence, they're bringing the Sponge Monkeys back.
Road trips are part of the American...
We are back on a road trip to get to Quiznos.
I like it a little bit because it's so unique, but definitely time will tell as to whether or not this will be successful and effective for them. Additionally, they've shifted to have a social media focus. Even though they only have around 300 or 400 units, they actually have over 100,000 followers on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, which is pretty substantial for such a small brand. The questionable part there though is based on our research, they're only spending about $110,000 in social media advertising. It just seems woefully inadequate when you're looking at a brand like Subway that's spending $500 million. Now, of course, Quiznos at 300, 400 units or whatever, you can't compete with a chain that has 44,000 worldwide. But I certainly feel like they need to inflict some pain on themselves and increase their marketing in the short term if they're going to have success and be able to reverse those numerous years of decline and start to go back on the upswing. So where does that leave Quiznos? Is Quiznos finally at the point where they can reverse years of declines and start to grow again? Is the new marketing push going to be effective? Is the franchise model with the current tweaks and whatnot, is that going to be what's effective in recruiting new operators to the brand? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Send me an email or leave a comment. As always, like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.